Hey, what's up everyone? Hope you're all having a great day. So you've probably already heard that there's been an alleged leak of the Season 9 patch notes. As one would expect, it's generated a lot of discussion amongst the community, and so of course I wanted to join in and share some of my thoughts as well. Keep in mind though that we're still quite far away from the Season 9 update, so even if they're real, there's no guarantee that the patch notes are complete, and there's of course no guarantee that there won't be further changes. Maybe this is all a big conspiracy, and Blizzard secretly leaked the patch notes ahead of time, intentionally, just to see how the community would react. That's probably not the case, but regardless, it's been quite fascinating to see the reaction of the community. Out of everything that we do see in the patch notes, there's a lot of interesting things to discuss. In particular, I wanted to go over what I think are the large implications to the core gameplay of Overwatch as a whole, as well as how these changes might affect certain heroes. There's one hero in particular that I fear might become problematic, but I'll talk more about that later. I've taken a look at the entire leak, and from what I can understand, I would say that the very high-level description or general goal of the patch, assuming it's real, seems to be three things. Increase the value of dealing damage in general, decrease the value of healing, and decrease the power of burst damage. Just looking at the notes, I would say that the actual changes themselves look like they should in theory accomplish these goals, but as there's so many changes coming at once, it's difficult to really tell how everything is going to play out. There are so many large-scale changes that it's essentially Overwatch 2 Part 2, or as some would say, Overwatch 3. But the way I like to see it is that Season 9 is the real Overwatch 2, and what we've been playing for the last year is the Overwatch 2 beta test. The patch seems to be an attempt to finally rebalance the game to hopefully better fit the 5v5 format. It's as if we're redistributing the stats of some hypothetical 6th player to the entire team, and reevaluating some of the changes that have already been made because of the change in format. If the leaks are real, I think the changes will have an effect that rivals that of the removal of the second tank. There are 4 distinct global changes and 1 role-specific change that completely shifts the identity of the damage role. Let's first talk about what I think is the least interesting out of the 4 global changes, which is that every hero's ult cost is going to be increased by 10%. Intuitively, this should have the effect of slightly slowing down the game and reducing the frequency of those high-impact moments when ultimates are used. Heroes with very strong ultimates tend to be balanced with higher ult costs, and a flat percentage increase across the board affects these kind of heroes disproportionately, which means that relatively speaking, heroes with weaker ultimates are favored by this change in comparison. This puts more of an emphasis on the general core gameplay loop. As more heroes have released, strong teamfight deciding ultimates have become more common, and without the presence of a second tank, they're also significantly more decisive. This has the effect of reducing the game to just a matter of who has the ultimate, where both teams just take turns ulting, and you never get a chance to encounter a real teamfight. This is quite a significant change if you happen to main a hero that doesn't have a very strong ultimate ability. As expected, the previously announced global self-healing passive is mentioned as well, and as predicted by many people, it doesn't really seem like it's going to be all that substantial. The passive heals at a rate of 20 health per second after 5 seconds out of combat, and I can't imagine it being very useful in the context of a teamfight. The one situation where it could make a difference is when you win a teamfight but both of your supports have died. The self-healing passive allows you to better capitalize on the one teamfight by allowing you to more easily play objectives without needing to wait for your supports to get back from spawn. Getting into the more interesting details, the first big change we should talk about is the global projectile size buff, which means that most heroes, even hitscan heroes, are now going to be slightly easier to aim with. Functionally, this change translates to most heroes dealing more damage in general, since real damage output is proportional to the accuracy of the player. Conversely, this also means that we're now going to be taking more damage in general as well. This change is especially relevant for heroes with small hitboxes like Tracer or Kiriko, because their hitboxes are already quite small, and they rely on the fact that they're difficult to hit. Even small projectile size increases can make a fairly significant difference. In addition, making it easier to aim allows less mechanically skilled players easier access to certain heroes, which in some ways lowers the mechanical skill gap of the game. If you're already hitting most of your shots right now, larger targets don't benefit you as much since you're already mostly on target. Even though everyone's accuracy should theoretically increase across the entire spectrum of skill, if heroes become easier to aim in general, it becomes more difficult to mechanically abuse weaker players. Different players will probably have differing opinions about this, and it probably depends on which side of the mechanical skill spectrum you land on. So in conjunction with the increased accuracy and therefore damage of most heroes, there's also going to be a global health increase to compensate, with most heroes getting about 25% more health. In theory, this means that everyone is tankier, however, it might not be that simple. The next change is perhaps the most surprising change, which is that the new damage passive is no longer a reload buff after an elimination. It is now 20% healing reduction for 2 seconds on damaged targets. This might be the most significant change in the patch, and in my opinion is likely to cause major shifts in power from the support role to the damage role. In combination with the fact that damage heroes are going to be hitting more shots with the projectile size buff, supports are going to have a much harder time saving teammates who are out of position or being dove. This is something that damage mains are potentially going to love and something that support mains are potentially going to hate. Although keep in mind that it's also a double-edged sword. It may be easier to get kills, but that means it's also easier to get killed in return. And now that support might not be able to provide pseudo-immortality at will, you won't be able to blame your support for not saving you if you're standing in the open. For support mains, how you're affected by this change might depend on your playstyle. If you like to DPS as a support player, it'll be a lot easier to get kills when coordinating with your DPS. But if you're a more healing-oriented support player, you're probably not going to be very happy now that your playstyle is being significantly nerfed. One specific interaction of the game that this affects significantly is the tug-of-war between healing and damage. When a player is being damaged by a single person, while also being healed, right now, healing usually comes out on top once accuracy is factored into the equation. Even top-level players, and especially lower-level players, struggle to do any meaningful damage to targets without large amounts of burst damage or coordinated focus fire. And because of this, the game can often feel quite tedious to play, especially when combined with the increasing amounts of immortality and movement abilities that allow people to escape. However, since heroes are also tankier across the board, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier to get kills directly, but it does make non-lethal damage more relevant, and therefore allows damage players to more easily get value without necessarily needing to make big impact plays like insta-killing the enemy. In addition, this also makes fighting a pocketed target less oppressive. Right now, pocketing is so strong that shooting a pocketed target almost gets no value at all. On paper, it sounds like great value because you might be drawing the attention of 2 heroes at once, but in practice, the pocketed hero can almost completely ignore you if you're the only one shooting at them, because their health bar increases faster than you're able to deal damage. So in reality, you're only really drawing the attention of the support who's doing the pocketing. One could make the argument that the right move in this situation would be to simply switch to a different target, but at the same time, the support can also just switch to pocketing the person you've switched to. This results in a relatively lame gameplay loop, at least in solo queue, where nothing dies unless either someone makes a mistake or someone makes a big play. If both teams are evenly matched, health bars have a tendency to never go down, and any play that doesn't directly result in an instant kill feels like a misplay rather than just a suboptimal play. To put it more clearly, Overwatch is a game about trading resources where both damage and healing are 2 opposing resources that often get traded. When healing is too strong, we can say that it's functionally more expensive to do 1 HP of damage than it is to do 1 HP of healing, and because of that, any damage that doesn't result in a kill is a necessarily bad investment. With the introduction of an anti-heal passive, it's less likely that supports will be able to keep up with the damage output coming from the enemy team over time, and so there's a more natural and guaranteed progression of teamfights even if both teams are evenly matched. What this means for supports is that a healing-focused playstyle won't get nearly as much value as it does now, and you will be incentivized to contribute damage or at least some other form of utility in order to get the same amount of value. This will probably translate to support being a slightly more difficult role to play in general, and so my prediction is that if this change proves to be true, is that support isn't going to be quite as popular as it is right now. As a side effect, because the anti-heal passive is applied as a flat percentage, it disproportionately affects supports with high healing outputs. This means that supports with lower healing outputs are going to be relatively stronger in comparison. Undoubtedly, this significantly affects the power dynamic between so-called healers and DPSs. For much of Overwatch 2, support has been cited as being the best role for climbing, but the damage role might be taking over that title in Season 9. Right now, the one situation in which damage is the better return on investment is in the case of burst damage and one-shots. If you can deal lethal damage faster than a healer can react, then healing becomes an entirely irrelevant consideration. However, for a long time now, high amounts and high frequencies of burst damage have been cited as a primary issue of the game. Especially with the removal of a second tank, angles and space have become more difficult to contest, and as a result, burst damage in its various forms occurs with higher frequency. In addition, the removal of a second tank also means that the value of a kill itself increases significantly, because each player composes a higher percentage of the team's total resources. This means that the inherent luck and randomness of one-shots have a much higher impact on the outcome of teamfights, which in general is seen as a bad thing for a competitive game. That's not to say that certain one-shot heroes don't take skill, but due to 5v5, the ability to roll the dice more often combined with the increased value of hitting a lucky shot means that it's become a rather annoying problem. Getting one shot before you or your team can react is naturally not a fun experience for the victim, but even from a design perspective, I think one can argue that the concept of frequent one-shots is unfitting for a game like Overwatch. Unlike tactical shooters where insta-kills are a natural part of the design philosophy, Overwatch gameplay centers around teamfighting and the methodical and continuous trading of resources. As such, when you introduce too many methods to bypass this process, it conflicts with the identity of the game. This is what the global health increase is meant to address. With the higher amounts of health, the effectiveness of burst damage is reduced because the proportion of the health bar it affects is comparatively smaller. Therefore, the effort it takes to reach a threshold where you can assassinate a target is increased, which should in theory reduce the frequency of insta-kills. Keep in mind that the problematic nature of burst damage doesn't just include literal one-shots. On paper, the only heroes currently capable of literal insta-kills on a single damage instance are Widowmaker and Hanzo. But the 200 HP breakpoint is relevant for a lot of heroes in the game, and the change from 200 to 250 changes a lot of things, assuming that most heroes stay the same. In case you don't know what a breakpoint is and why it's important, a breakpoint just refers to a numerical value at which the outcome of an event changes significantly. In Overwatch, this usually refers to the outcome of whether or not a hero dies as a result of a specific thing. For example, we can look at the event of Roadhog hooking, shooting, and meleeing a target. If this combo does less than 200 damage, which it currently does, the target doesn't die and has a chance of getting away. If it does more than 200 damage, the target dies, and so the number 200 is a significant so-called breakpoint for the balance of a hero like Roadhog. Here's a quick list of some of the most important things the HP change affects. Mei can no longer 2-tap with a headshot and body shots, Junkrat can no longer kill with a direct hit and a single mine, Kiriko can no longer 2-tap at all even if she hits 2 headshots, Baptiste can no longer 2-burst unless he hits 5 out of 6 shots to the head, which is very unlikely due to recoil, Zenyatta can no longer 2-tap to the head with Discord Orb, Cassidy can no longer 2-tap at all and requires 4 shots to the body, which is quite significant considering he only has 6 shots per mag, Ashe can no longer 2-tap with a headshot and body shots, Soldier 76 is significantly less likely to get a kill without reloading, Tracer can practically no longer one-clip at all, Roadhog is significantly less likely to one-shot even if he hooks into a pig pen, Reinhardt can't kill with 2 fire strikes, and perhaps the most important of all is that Hanzo can no longer one-shot with a headshot. And of course we can't forget to mention that Genji's dash plus a swing of Nanoblade no longer gets a kill either. Basically, with the breakpoint change from 200 to 250, many of the things that can take you by surprise and or happen randomly can no longer kill you, assuming you're at full health, which should improve the feeling of consistency and predictability of the game, particularly for non-tank mains. There is, however, one hero that I mentioned I was concerned about at the beginning of the video, and that hero is Widowmaker. Widow's headshot is not affected by the change from 200 to 250 because her headshot does 300 damage. In the context of a game where everyone is tankier and most heroes have lost their 1-taps and 2-taps, retaining a one-shot potential is especially important. Although Widow has lost the ability to kill in 2 body shots and her one-shot range is slightly shorter, in the right hands, Widow is potentially going to be even stronger, and by extension, even more annoying to deal with than she is now. It's difficult to predict precisely how the health buff impacts the meta, but in general what's likely to happen is that burst damage is nerfed, and because of that, any form of sustained damage is stronger by comparison. And for damage heroes, sustained damage is even more effective because of the anti-healing passive. Poke and dive DPSs both have a good opportunity to be the ultimate winners in the meta. It's hard to say which one will come out on top, but I think there's good arguments for both. Poke heroes are able to reliably and consistently apply the anti-healing effect from range, and are now not at risk of being one-shot from unexpected angles. The effect on dive heroes is a bit more difficult to predict. On the one hand, they also benefit from the anti-heal, which could make it more difficult to deny their engagements, and they also more easily benefit from the self-healing passive. But on the other hand, the health increases make it more difficult to catch people off guard. My prediction, assuming the patch is real, is that Poke will probably be the playstyle that comes out on top, at least in the context of solo queue. In organized play, it's possible that dive could be the preferred meta due to the ability to coordinate. Damage-focused supports like Baptiste, Solari, and Zenyatta could work their way up as well, as they also stand to benefit a lot from the anti-heal passive indirectly, and because their healing-focused counterparts are now comparatively weaker. In the case of Zenyatta specifically, we may be seeing more Zenyatta players even at lower skill levels where he's usually not very popular. The projectile size buff increases the consistency of his shots, the health buffs make it harder to punish him when he moves out of cover, the anti-heal passive doesn't concern him as much, but more importantly, Discord Orb is now more efficient. We might also be seeing a Bastion meta return again. At a rate of 360 DPS, Bastion already is barely bothered by the HP of certain tanks, let alone 250. In addition, he now applies healing reduction, it's going to be easier to hit his shots, and he benefits even more from the health buffs due to the % damage reduction in his turret form. Speaking of tanks, it doesn't seem like they're going to be getting a lot of help from this patch. Although they are getting health increases, the introduction of the anti-heal passive combined with the very large hitboxes of most tanks means that they're not necessarily going to feel much more survivable, particularly tanks without shields. Tanks aren't receiving any damage increases either, and so because of the health increases, it's going to be even harder to confirm kills, further increasing their inherent reliance on teammates. Again, at this point, it's difficult to predict how the meta is affected by all these changes, and of course, we still have to keep in mind that the leak itself might not even be real. Even if it is real, it's subject to change, and there could be more changes that weren't included in the leak, which would make sense considering that some heroes seem like they would be in dire need of some compensation buffs or reworks due to the health changes. If the leak does eventually prove to be real, I'm sort of on the fence, but I'm leaning towards optimism. If it's proven not to be real, I think the general idea of the changes is still pretty interesting, and I would love to see it being tested as an experiment, perhaps as a quick play hacked event. As for whether or not I think it's actually real, I'm leaning towards predicting that they are. If I was a person attempting to prank the entire community with fake leaks, the list of changes seems like it would be a little bit too much effort than it would be worth. But maybe such a person would predict that I would say something like this, and that's why they made the list so long. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. That's all I have to say for now. I would love to know what you think about these potential changes. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and leaving a like and comment to support the channel. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day.